What's up guys, Nuance Bro checking in, and today we're going to be talking about Bernie Sanders and his new explanation for how he's going to pay for all of his major plans. But first, if you'd like to support this channel, please support us at nuancebro.com/join. This channel has a 96% impression disadvantage according to the data, which means that YouTube suppresses our content to a pretty significant degree. So if you'd like to support the channel, nuancebro.com/join. So a few days ago, 60 Minutes aired an interview between Anderson Cooper and Bernie Sanders, where it seemed like Bernie Sanders had no real clue about how much his proposals would cost. And it didn't look too good for him, so take a look at that.
There is profound skepticism in Congress about Sanders' ability to get his agenda passed. 2/3 of Democrats in the Senate haven't signed on to Medicare for All, which would cost an estimated $30 to $40 trillion over 10 years. And that's just one of Bernie Sanders' many proposals. There's also free public college, cancellation of all student debt, a federal job guarantee, and a Green New Deal to rapidly reduce carbon emissions. How much will that cost?
Obviously, those are expensive propositions, but we have done our best on issue after issue in paying for them.
Do you know how much, though? I mean, do you have a price tag for all of this?
We do. I mean, you know, the price tag is, it will be substantially less than letting the current system go. I think it's about $30 trillion.
That's just for Medicare for All.
Just Medicare for All, yes.
Do you have a price tag for all of these things?
No, I don't. We try to, no, you mentioned making public colleges and universities tuition-free and canceling all student debt. That's correct. That's what I want to do. We pay for that through a modest tax on Wall Street speculation.
But you say you don't know what the total price is, but you know how it's going to be paid for. How do you know it's going to be paid for if you don't know how much the price is?
Well, I can't rattle off to you every nickel and every dime, but we have accounted for it. You talked about Medicare for All. We have options out there that will pay for it.
So a day or two after that, Bernie Sanders went on CNN for a town hall in South Carolina, where he was asked once again about this issue of cost and Medicare for All and basically his major plans overall.
Here's what I want to do. Chris, I'm going to give this to you. I thought that question might come up. All right, here it is. This is a list which will be on our website tonight of how we pay for every program that we have developed.
So you can see Bernie Sanders comes out and he pulls this sort of boss move where he's like, listen, I thought this would come up, you know, obviously given that he had his 60 Minutes interview that looked really bad for him. So he's like, listen, I got this piece of paper right here. It's going to be on our website tonight. And it lays out how we're going to pay for everything that I've talked about. So pulling kind of a boss move, he handed it over to Cuomo, who was the moderator for the event or the host. And he said everybody could visit this plan online. Now, as soon as I heard that, I was super interested because I'm all about the numbers. I love looking at the numbers and seeing if everything adds up. And I knew I had to look especially at this Medicare for All proposal. So I went on the site and I looked at it and I obviously found a lot of problems, which we're going to get into. But I wanted to see if the host or moderator, Chris Cuomo, would call him out on any of this.
You're slick giving me this piece of paper.
I know.
I couldn't pay attention. The criticism is there is a lot of detail in here. You can look for it for yourselves on the website. It is not matching the price tag that some put at about $30 trillion for the Medicare for All transition. You do have lots of different ideas in here. I'm not saying you don't. But you get about halfway there. No. The question becomes, how do you get the rest of the way?
Well, we get there. You know, there was a study, Chris, I don't know if you happen to see it. I don't know if anyone...
$30 trillion over 10 years.
So you got to give Chris Cuomo some props here because he was just handed this new piece of paper that he's probably never seen before, and he has to look into it while he's trying to still do his job as a host or moderator of the town hall, and he quickly looks through it in a matter of about a few seconds or a minute or so, and then he comes up to Bernie Sanders and he basically calls him out for saying, look, I'm looking at this Medicare for All section, and the numbers just don't add up. And then Bernie's like, oh no, of course, the numbers do add up. Take a look at it again. And then he goes into this whole explanation. I'm not going to show the whole video just because he goes on and he's basically rambling and trying to obfuscate on the issue. I'm going to leave a link in the description down below if you want to watch the whole thing. But basically, Bernie doesn't really give an answer. He talks about a Yale study that was published in the Lancet Journal, and we're going to go over that as well. But he doesn't really lay out like, okay, this is how much the plan costs. And this is the revenue we generate from these various sources. He tries to pretend he names some of the revenue sources, but he doesn't really get into the numbers because obviously the numbers don't add up. So let's go to Bernie Sanders' site and take a look for ourselves. So as you can see, this is the Bernie website, and under issues, how does Bernie pay for his major plans? And if we scroll down, we see the Medicare for All section. Now we're gonna go over other aspects of this page as well, but I figured we should just start with the big kahuna, Medicare for All. According to a February 15th, 2020 study by epidemiologists at Yale University, the Medicare for All bill that Bernie wrote would save over $450 billion in healthcare costs and prevent 68,000 unnecessary deaths each and every year. So if you remember, this is the study that Bernie mentioned to Chris Cuomo in that town hall where he said it would save us a bunch of money. But let's get into the exact numbers, because he doesn't talk about how much that Yale study actually projected that overall Medicare for All would actually cost, because the study did talk about that, but he doesn't mention it here. So if he doesn't mention total cost, let's at least look at the revenue that he's going to generate from his various sources. So here we can see creating a 4% income-based premium paid by employees, exempting the first $29,000 in income for a family of 4. And the revenue from that we see is $4 trillion over 10 years. The next one is imposing a 7.5% income-based premium paid by employers, exempting the first $1 million in payroll to protect small businesses. And we see the revenue from that is over $5.2 trillion over 10 years. Eliminating health tax expenditures, which would no longer be needed under Medicare for All, which they say will raise $3 trillion over 10 years. Raising the top marginal income tax to 52% on income over 10 million, which they say will raise $700 billion over 10 years. Replacing the cap on the state and local tax deduction with an overall dollar cap of $50,000 for a married couple on all itemized deductions, which is about $400 billion over 10 years. Taxing capital gains at the same rate as income from wages and cracking down on gaming through derivatives, like-kind exchanges, and the zero tax rate on capital gains passed on through bequests, which they say will raise $2.5 trillion over 10 years. Enacting the 99.8% Act, which returns the estate tax exemption to the 2009 level of $3.5 million, closes egregious loopholes, and increases rates progressively, including by adding a top tax rate of 77% on estate values in excess of $1 billion, which they say will raise $336 billion over 10 years. Enacting corporate tax reform, which includes restoring the top federal corporate income tax to 35%, which they say raises $3 trillion. And using $350 billion of the amount raised from the tax on extreme wealth to help finance Medicare for All, which is something they mentioned earlier in the page, which we'll get to. So let's do some quick math. Let's add up all this revenue. So we're going to do everything by trillion. So 4 trillion will just be 4, and something like 700 billion will just be 0.7. So let's do it by trillions, and we're doing this over 10 years because we know the cost of Medicare for All at the lowest estimate, according to even Bernie Sanders himself in that 60 Minutes interview, would be something like $30 trillion. A lot of people say it would be a lot higher, but let's be generous and say $30 trillion over 10 years is the cost for Medicare for All under Bernie's plan. So let's add up the revenue here. So we have the 4 trillion over 10 years, plus 5.2, plus 3 trillion, plus 700 billion, plus 400 billion, plus 2.5 trillion, plus 336 billion, plus 3 trillion. Oh, wait, we got to be careful here. Look at the text, because they say raised revenue 3 trillion, but then keep reading, of which 1 trillion would be used to help finance Medicare for All and 2 trillion used for the new Green Deal. So it's not really 3 trillion for Medicare for All. It's actually just 1 trillion because the rest goes to the Green New Deal. So we'll do plus 1 trillion and then 350 billion. Which gets us 17.486 trillion. So basically, we'll be generous, we'll round that up, $17.5 trillion. So Chris Cuomo was actually correct. This only really goes up halfway to meeting the goal, maybe a little more than halfway if you're using the lowest estimate of the actual cost for Medicare for All, $30 trillion, as we remember from the 60 Minutes clip. And this is why they don't tell you the full cost of Medicare for All in their plan. Because when you look at the revenue that they list, which they also don't add, they make you do the math as far as adding up the total because they know it doesn't look good. If you add up all the numbers, it doesn't make sense. So when Bernie Sanders says, oh, it's all there, if you look at our plan, it's all there, it's all listed. It's really not, because if you're saying it costs $30 trillion and you only raise $17.4 trillion, where's the rest? Now remember that Yale study that Bernie referenced in the town hall and also on his website that said, oh, it's going to save us $450 billion a year and 68,000 lives. Well, here's a Washington Post article that says, here's that Medicare for All study Bernie Sanders keeps bringing up. A single-payer healthcare system would save more than 68,000 lives and $450 billion a year, new research shows. And if we scroll down, add it all up, and here's what you get. A new system that would cost about $3 trillion a year instead of the $3.5 trillion that is being spent now. So look at that. $3 trillion a year over 10 years, that's $30 trillion. The same number that they talked about in that 60 Minutes program, but that he wouldn't list for some reason as far as how much it would cost on his website, because obviously the cost being $30 trillion and you only raising $17.5 trillion in revenue doesn't really add up. And it's weird because in certain parts of the plan, he actually lists what he says is the exact cost and the exact revenue that they're going to raise for that program. For example, if we look at the College for All and cancel all student debt, it will cost $2.2 trillion to make public colleges, universities, and trade schools tuition free and to cancel all student debt over the next decade. It is fully paid for by a modest tax on Wall Street speculation that will raise an estimated $2.4 trillion over 10 years. And if you click the plan, it takes you to a page where it tells you, okay, this is the trading volume in Wall Street, and this is the amount of tax we're going to put on that trading, that speculation, blah, blah, blah. And we obviously know this is how much student debt there is, and this is the cost for college, universities, and trade schools. So we add all that up over 10 years, it costs this much, and this is how much we're raising. So it makes the math very easy. It tells you this is how much it costs, this is how much we're raising. Now, we're going to ignore the fact that obviously this assumes sort of everything sort of stays the same. Bernie Sanders' presidency not tanking the stock market and changing everyone's behavior, because of course, in a situation like a Bernie Sanders presidency, and he's raising taxes like crazy, people are going to try to avoid those taxes. Businesses are going to restructure in a way where they don't have to pay as many taxes. They might move to different countries, blah, blah, blah. So this is all just, we're just going to be generous and assume their best projections of the revenue, because they're going to be the most generous on the revenue as well as the cost. So they're going to bring the cost to the lowest estimates and bring the revenue to the highest estimates, because that's politics, of course. So he lays out the cost and the revenues being raised on a plan like that, but then we go to the next one, expanding Social Security. And though you see numbers like $1,300 a year, and you see percentages 1.8%, and then you see $250,000 a year, so it makes it sound like he's talking about numbers here, but when you look overall, he doesn't tell you what does it cost and what's the revenue raised. He doesn't mention it. Even when you click to read the plan, which it has the link, click here to read the plan, it doesn't tell you the cost and the revenue raised. Next, we have Housing for All and Universal Child Care and Pre-K, which are both paid by Bernie's wealth tax, which raises a total of $4.35 trillion over 10 years. So he says the Housing for All costs $2.5 trillion, the Universal Child Care and Pre-K will cost $1.5 trillion, this is over 10 years, and his wealth tax raises $4.35 trillion. So of course we have an extra $350 billion, according to their own projections, for Medicare for All that we saw listed at the bottom of the list we talked about earlier. Eliminating medical debt, Bernie has introduced a proposal to eliminate all of the $81 billion in past due medical debt held by 79 million Americans. It is fully paid for by establishing an income inequality tax on large corporations that pay CEOs at least 50 times more than the average worker. But this is another interesting one, because this is another big ticket item, the Green New Deal. So, right off the bat, the $16.3 trillion climate change proposal that Bernie has introduced will fundamentally transform our energy system away from fossil fuel and towards energy efficiency and renewable energy. It will also create 20 million good-paying union jobs in the process, and they say it is fully paid for by raising $3.085 trillion by making the fossil fuel industry pay for their pollution through litigation, fees, and taxes, and eliminating federal fossil fuel subsidies. generating $6.4 trillion in revenue from the wholesale of energy produced by the regional power marketing administrations. This revenue will be collected from 2023 through 2035, and after 2035, electricity will be virtually free aside from operations and maintenance costs, reducing defense spending by $1.215 trillion by scaling back military operations on protecting the global oil supply, collecting $2.3 trillion in new income tax revenue from the 20 million new jobs created by the plan, saving $1.31 trillion by reduced the need, they messed up there when they wrote that, for federal and state safety net spending due to the creation of millions of good-paying unionized jobs, raising $2 trillion in revenue by making large corporations pay their fair share of taxes. So some of this is a little bit murky as far as like, oh, we're gonna sue them through litigation and I guess collect fees, which adds up to the $3 trillion, the fees and the taxes. Also saying we're going to save money by reducing safety net spending, by creating the jobs, even though the jobs are coming from the spending. So it gets into a lot of weird sort of Keynesian math that doesn't make the most sense. But the thing that really catches me here is the $16.3 trillion price tag over 10 years. Because if you've heard about the Green New Deal, and we've talked about this before, a lot of the estimates that you've probably heard on TV is this price tag of $96 trillion. Now, granted, that's on the high end of estimates, $96 trillion, but where do you get this $16.3 trillion number for the Green New Deal? Because I've never seen an estimate that low over 10 years, $16.3 trillion. The lower estimates I've seen are something like $50 trillion. Now, this doesn't even get into the fact that Medicare, for example, 80% of hospitals are losing money on Medicare reimbursements and things like that. So if you had a Medicare for all system, you'd have to make up for that somehow because hospitals are making their money off of the private insurance market. You go to a Medicare for all system, assuming you keep the reimbursements the same, because a lot of people say they would be cut in order to just make the program feasible in the first place. If you kept the reimbursements the same at what they are, something like 80% of hospitals plus would lose money. It just wouldn't make sense. It would actually likely increase to almost all of them. You would have to probably increase the reimbursement rates just for hospitals to make money. And then on top of that, you'd have to say, okay, doctors, you're taking a pay cut, nurses, administrators, blah, blah, blah. So we're not even going to get into the math of that. Just even looking at the math on his own website as far as saying, this is how much it costs, which he doesn't list. We have to actually go to the study that he references and to Bernie himself in a 60 Minutes interview to find out he's talking about $30 trillion over 10 years because he doesn't list it on his website. And then we add up the numbers, which he doesn't add up for us on the website. We have to add it up ourselves using a calculator. Then we find out it doesn't even add up to $30 trillion. It's basically halfway there. So this is really bizarre. I don't know what his team was even thinking. Honestly, it would probably be better to just not have a plan and continue to lie about how you're going to pay for things than to put out something like this where people can call you out on your BS. So that's the end of the video, guys. I thought you guys would enjoy it. What did you guys think about the video? Leave it down in the comments below. And yeah, that's the end of the video, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Social media links are in the description box below, as well as merch. Support us at nuancebro.com/join, and I'll see you next time, bro.